The vast expanse of the ocean conceals a realm where primordial predators reign supreme. Beneath the surface, a world of sharp teeth and powerful jaws awaits the unsuspecting. These waters, teeming with life, are also a graveyard for the unwary, for they are infested with nature's most fearsome hunters, sharks. Ancient, streamlined killing machines, honed by millions of years of evolution, patrol these depths with a single purpose: survival and conquer. In this unforgiving domain, the slightest miscalculation can spell the difference between life and becoming just another meal in the endless food chain cycle. Here are 6 attack encounters. It was 2002, and the Wilkins family of Sydney was due to take a fishing trip. Richard, 48, a very influential businessman, was eager to spend some time with his 22-year-old son Christopher before he left for college in the U.S. Their relationship had become strained through the years, for the over-imposing and demanding Richard was always nudging Christopher toward perfection, causing a little chasm between the two. They hired a boat and guide, Mick Larson, in the sleepy coastal town of Port Stevens. The place had a reputation for its shark-infested waters, reputedly inhabited by large numbers of aggressive gray reef sharks. Then there was Mick, regaling them with his decades of experience rubbing up against the apex predators that patrolled these deep offshore waters. The tension on the first day was, therefore, very high, as Richard's expectations were pitted against Christopher's inexperience with deep-sea fishing. Angrily, the father went into a fit of rage and actually pushed his son overboard into shark-infested waters in one particularly heated argument. Christopher was barely able to keep his head above water as the distinguishing fins of circling sharks closed in rapidly. Without hesitation, Richard dove in after him. Father and son found themselves in a heart-stopping frenzy, fighting to keep ravenous sharks at bay. Richard covered Christopher with his own body as powerful jaws clamped down, shredding flesh from his leg. As the nightmare unfolded, Mick viewed it in horror from the boat. He sprang into action, firing flares to create a sensory overload on the sharks, making noise and smoke, tossing in objects to distract the predator's instincts. In a tiny lull between the distractions, Richard managed to cue up enough strength to heave Christopher within reach of the boat. Mick drew him inside to safety, but Richard wasn't so lucky. As Christopher slipped from his grasp, another shark hit with incredible swiftness. Its jaws closed just above Richard's knee. In a split second, Mick harpooned the shark that was mauling Richard's shredded leg. The others broke off their attack with the shark injured and blood all around them now, but only briefly. They rapidly began to realize Richard was moments away from bleeding out. Mick dragged Richard's fading body aboard, desperately tying a tourniquet around the ruined leg. In a race against time, he pushed the boat to full tilt to get the grievously injured Richard to emergency aid before it was too late. Hours later, Richard crashed through the doors into a trauma team. He was rushed to emergency surgery, where doctors fought to repair the catastrophic damage and save his mangled limb. It would be left to the vascular surgeons to thread through severed blood vessels and delicate nerves, inch by inch, in an unremitting battle throughout the night. The days just bled into the next as Richard clung to life in intensive care. Christopher refused to leave his bedside, plagued by the thought that it was his weakness that had occasioned such a dangerous ordeal for his father. A week later, when Richard finally came to, his son was the first person to greet his eyes, etched with worry and remorse. The punishment was physically and mentally draining because the father and son relationship was tenser than ever. Christopher believed that he had fumbled and directly caused the suffering of his dad by his actions. The healing was long, drawn out, and painful, with draining procedures and physical therapy for Richard to get back on his feet. The wounds took months to start healing, not just the physical ones. It was after months, and through a chance conversation with an old mentor, that Richard realized how close he had come to losing everything because of his pride and the unrealistic expectations placed on his son. Healing was slow. Richard cut back the workload and promised himself he would spend more one-on-one time with Christopher. His son tried harder to open up and was set to share his life, feelings, and struggles. His father's permanently diminished stride due to the mangled leg, viewed up close, cemented an already hardening resolve Christopher's to forge an authentic path all his own, free of parental expectation. That was not going ever completely to fade, the scary encounter with death. But as before, the same effect was not there. For Richard, it was a close call with death that made them realize no career achievement or award would be worth more than fixing the broken relationship between a father and his son. Thus, it was during the twilight years, when grandchildren further blessed that family unit, that very relationship not only survived but flourished. Indeed, it survived the most turbulent maelstrom either of them would ever be exposed to. No storm, as both knew, could shake the renewed, unbreakable roots. What nearly tore them apart became the bedrock for an inextricable link that united them. The agonizing recovery, the specter of death always haunting them, and the emotional scars, all solidified into a relationship tempered by the scorching flames of hardship. From this crucible, father and son emerged with a bond strengthened by trials, reborn from the ashes of their formerly strained relationship. Instead of an iron pillar of an overruling father, condemning eyes, and a generation divided, now there was a connection of respect, empathy, and love. Richard began developing a tolerance for the plus points his son brought to the table instead of grieving the non-conformity of his son to some idealistic standards in his mind. On the other hand, Christopher understood the depth of self-sacrifice his dad had gone through for his son. Thus, from the very mouth of death sprang up a new and indissoluble cord. A family, though not of blood, inseparably stamped upon their souls, as it were, staring into the void and defiantly choosing family over its inky blackness. How their relationship was forged for every storm. Petty chasms that once rent it sunder now transcend. Through crucibles of trauma, the estranged father and son are bonded as brothers unto the world. It was in 2008 in the tiny town of Sitka among the unblemished wilds of southeastern Alaska, where the rugged coastline twisted and turned, edging out into the icy waters of the passage. The small Baranof Island town has a history that is so ancient, even from when it served as the very capital of Russian America. It is in this beautiful town, known for its natural beauty and abundant wildlife, where the most surreal and terrifying human encounter with one of the ocean apex predators played out. Jasper Hawthorne and his wife, Zara Hawthorne Chen, celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary by sea kayaking in the waters of Sitka. The Seattle couple, who were very adventurous, had been planning their trip for months and feeling ambitious to be pioneers of the untamed beauty of Alaska's coastline. Zara, a marine biologist with a specialty in cetacean behavior, was the most excited for the opportunity to witness whales in the environment of their existence. She has prepared a carefully charted route for them, so that even as they paddled through some of the world's most picturesque locations, they avoided pitfalls. The couple was excited and full of anticipation as they set out from Sitka that morning. They'd rented a tandem kayak with a bright yellow color marking it conspicuously against the deep blue-green waters of the Pacific. They had on their life jackets, flares, and a waterproof radio, well girded in safety gear. There was nothing less than enchanting about the first few days. The paddling through unspoiled fjords with towering spruces lining the shores, and snow-capped mountains looming behind them, bald eagles soaring above, curious harbor seals bobbing their heads above water to eye the brightly colored intruders in their domain. On the 4th day of the journey, rounding the south end of Baranof Island, Zara, far ahead, caught sight of an orca pod. Beauteous beasts. She pointed them out to Jasper, prodding him with her paddle as her heart raced. The couple, in a daze from this fine view, stopped paddling and let their kayak drift aimlessly. The pod, consisting of about 6 animals, appeared to be choreographing some massive hunting rehearsal. Zara's experienced eye spotted one huge male whose dorsal fin stood like a skyscraper. She calculated it at maybe 6 feet high. With all power and grace, the movement of the black and white bodies glistened in the weak autumn sunlight. The couple sat perplexed as they watched the orcas closely, because they were actually closing in on their kayak. She tried to comfort Jasper by reminding him that this was common behavior, and that orcas were only being curious-minded. Besides, orcas in the wild had never been known to attack humans, and so they must have been inspecting something in nature. But as the pod got closer, Zara's confidence in her scientific understanding started to fade. The big male she had watched just a second earlier, basked in the dusk light, had opened his eyes, and to Zara, he seemed absolutely hostile to their kayak and burned with a menacing intensity in his eye. She was turning to voice her concerns to Jasper when the giant orca veered sharply into their path to swim straight for their little kayak. The strike was at once surprising and terrifying. Charging full length at their kayak, the male orca braced the contraption to the point of almost flipping it over. Water lapped into the kayak over the rim as Jasper and Zara clutched at the sides to keep balanced. It was unprecedented, and Zara's mind raced with the ramifications. In all her years studying cetaceans, she had never heard of, let alone seen, an orca actually attacking a boat on purpose. Trying to wrap her head around this shocking turn of events, she watched in horror as the orca circled back for another pass. Seeing the seriousness of the situation, Jasper paddled with all the energy he could spare in order to reach some land that was visible at a distant rocky small island. Zara joined him in the venture, both bracing their muscles for action as they pulled with all their energy, driving the kayak toward safety. It seemed as though the orca was bent on keeping up the relentless pursuit. The strike had come from behind, and the force had sent Jasper and Zara jerking violently forward. The blow opened a hairline crack in the hull of the kayak, and water was already streaming into it at a steady pace. As her paddling arms powered toward the island, Zara's scientific mind raced. She deduced it must have been a young male orca processing confusion, or some other variation of frustration with the shape and color of her kayak. Again, little comfort was derived from understanding the possible motives for the attack against the reality of what they were now facing. Survival was the one thing on Jasper's mind at this point. When he realized that the killer whale seemed to have more interest in their kayak than in them, an idea that could either end his life or save it crossed his mind. It wasn't until they were a quarter mile from the island that he revealed his plan to her. Zara nodded grimly. The risk was great, but she could see no other way that would lead them to safety. There was the entrance of a great deal of churning in the water, announcing the killer whale was returning for another try. When suddenly Jasper stopped paddling, stood upright in the kayak, and began shouting and waving his arms wildly. The changeful move and noise suddenly shocked the killer whale. At the very last second, it turned off its course. Its bulky body rolled, spraying a wave to rock the kayak strongly. Jasper was nearly bucked off, yet managed to pull through, still yelling and making noises in the water to keep the orca fully interested in him. Zara seized her opportunity and wound down into the water silently, with all her might. Growing up with years of undergraduate education as a college competitive swimmer, she started swimming toward the island with the help of the wind. Jasper watched her progress in stealth mode, his heart beating wildly. He feared for her safety, and at the same time, he also hoped for their survival. The orca now seemed to be somewhat put off by the division of targets and just circled warily around the kayak. Its noisy occupant held up his end, enthusiastically shouting, punctuated by slapping at the water with his paddle. So far, it was working. The orca's attention stayed riveted on the kayak and its noisy occupant. As Zara swam to shore with her last ounce of strength, Jasper unrolled part 2 of the plan. He rebuilt his lungs and dived into the water on the opposite side of the kayak, in a direction diametrically opposite to that Zara had taken. The orca hesitated, and with one more target to follow, it completely lost sight of both. He dropped until the pain in his lungs was unbearable, then rolled a few times so that finally the orca lost sight of him. It was all he could do to get his gasping breath when he surged at last above the surface, maybe 50 yards away from the kayak now. The orca swam leisurely around the now empty vessel as if confused at its occupant's disappearing act. With the orca having left, being preoccupied somewhere else, Jasper began to swim for the island Zara had reached the shore of, a rock-bound shore. His muscles screamed in exertion, and the bleak, cold Alaskan waters drained him. Yet he kept paddling for Zara, who awaited him on the beach. As Jasper reached the shore, the orca became disinterested in the now empty kayak and started swimming away. Back to its pod, which had been circling always just out of reach the entire time, Zara let out a sob of tears as she watched from the shore, her mind a whirlwind of emotions as the orcas swam away. Jasper dragged himself out onto the rocky beach, trembling and exhausted. Zara rushed over to him, taking him in her arms, hugging him fiercely to her, tears of fear and relief streaming down both their faces. They had come within an inch of losing their lives, But now they had been stranded on a tiny, desolate island, having left most of their equipment in the partly submerged kayak floating offshore. The couple gave a signal call for them to be rescued. Finally, rescue arrived at first light the next morning. A fishing boat, spotting the distress signal they had sent 4 days before, discovered them huddled on shore, still in each other's arms. Even for these fishermen, a grizzled old Tlingit man called Joe and his son Thomas, this couple had a story of survival that was adequately terrifying. They returned home to Sitka without a scratch. Weeks passed from there, and the waters of Sitka continued to flow, as picturesque and untamed as before, but now tinged with an imprint of unyielding might and capriciousness in nature. An incandescent backdrop for two adventurers who had faced the eyes of one of the sea's most feared predators and lived to tell the tale. In its unflinching ordeal, the young couple was exposed to nature's raw power, surviving against all odds with quick thinking, determination, and a courageous will to live. The sweltering summer of 2010 saw the sun pound down relentlessly on the shores of Key Largo, Florida. A group of students enrolled in the marine biology course at the University of Miami had embarked on what was supposed to be just another routine research expedition. Key Largo, the largest and most northerly of the Florida Keys, had emerged as the haven for sea lovers and scientists. Its proximity to the only living coral barrier reef in the continental United States made it an ideal location for studying diverse marine ecosystems. It was a small team of 5 graduate students headed by Dr. Zilphia Quillbrook that included Thaddeus Frostweaver, a tall, slim young man with a penchant for dad jokes; Elowen Zephyrstone with a razor-sharp mind and comprehensive knowledge of shark species; Orion Starforge, the group's electronics wizard come underwater photographer extraordinaire; Lumina Tidewhisper, a free-spirited surfer turned marine biologist; and lastly, Caspian Stormrider, whose diving skills were second to none in that group. They aimed to study the effects of the rising ocean temperature on the fragile coral ecosystems of Florida Reef Tract. They did not know that the scientific enterprise would soon turn into a hair-raising struggle for life against one of the most misunderstood ocean predators. On one particular day, the team boarded their research vessel, the Coral Queen, and headed for its destination, Molasses Reef. This favorite diving spot would present them with colorful marine life. While getting their gear ready, Thaddeus really poured it on with his typical jokes, and his teammates groaned at him. He simply asked why fish didn't wear armor and proceeded to say that it was because they had scales. Elowen rolled her eyes this time, but couldn't entirely kill a smile. Dr. Quillbrook briefed them for the last time before she let them get into the water. She reminded them they were only guests in the ocean's home field. They were there to observe, document, and not interfere. And above all else, he cautioned them to be alert. With one last check of the equipment, they plunged into the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean. Everything seemed to go well for the first hour. The students diligently took data on coral health, water temperature, and fish populations. Orion's underwater camera clicked away, taking great shots of the reef dwellers. It was Lumina who first noticed something wrong. A school of smaller fish suddenly darted past them as if they were fleeing from some invisible threat. Within minutes, they saw them. A dozen-strong school of hammerhead sharks circling the divers with unnatural, uncanny precision. The hammer-shaped heads, which give these sharks their name, moved from side to side as they sized up the unknown visitors to their territory. Panic threatened to well up, but Dr. Quillbrook signaled for the team to stay calm and stay close. They knew that erratic body movements or signs of panic could trigger some sharks' predatory instincts. Elowen's mind raced through everything she knew about hammerhead behavior and silently reassured herself that attacks by them were very rare, unprovoked. Slowly, gingerly, the team made their ascent. Caspian gestured at them from where he floated, reminding everyone not to act jerky and to breathe regularly. The sharks pressed in, circling. They were obviously fascinated by the odd, bubble-exhaling creatures that had invaded their territory. Seeing the surface, relief started washing over the team. Their struggle, however, was far from done. They had a heart-stopping moment when they realized Thaddeus was no longer with them. Panic set in as they scanned the waters until they finally saw him about 30 feet away and indeed alone. cut off from the group and surrounded by three of the most giant hammerheads. Dr. Quillbrook knew they had to be quick. Orion and Caspian would have to crawl toward the boat, preparing for a fast extraction, while she, Eowyn, and Lumina tried to get Thaddeus back. The plan was precarious, but leaving him outside the question. As they warily drew closer, they saw Thaddeus fighting to stay calm. His eyes, wide with fear behind his mask, met Eowyn's. She nodded reassuringly at him. Her years of studying sharks kicked into high gear. She didn't want the animal to think it was cornered between her and Thaddeus. Slowly and deliberately, she inched herself between Thaddeus and the nearest shark, acting as a human barrier. Drawing on her surfer's intuition of reading the water, Lumina noticed a slight shift in sharks' behavior. It was as if they grew more curious than hostile, their movements less jagged. She motioned to the others to mimic the movement of the sharks, swimming in wide, slow circles. Much to everyone's surprise, it worked. The sharks, perhaps having finally decided these strange creatures weren't prey after all, began losing interest. They peeled off from the group one by one, disappearing into the blue depths from whence they came. With the worst of the danger now out of the way, the team hastily but cautiously boarded the Coral Queen once more. Climbing aboard, the adrenaline that had held them in such sharp focus began to wear off, and it was replaced by a mix of relief and lingering fear. The next few weeks were harrowing for the team. They organized a campaign about public awareness of shark preservation and what was required to keep marine ecosystems healthy. More specifically, they had discovered a new meaning. Feeling alive after their experience in danger, they opted to specialize in shark behavior, hoping to bridge the gap between human fear and understanding of these magnificent creatures one day. In 2013, 450 kilometers southwest of Sri Lanka, the azure depths of the Indian Ocean opened out for deep-sea exploration. Researchers were unaware that this region held a long mystery to unfold: the mysterious Diamantina Trench and multiple unexplored abyssal plains. Here began the fateful mission of the state-of-the-art submersible Nautilus Prime. Dr. Zara Thornberry was the chief marine biologist of this expedition, and in this venture she had assembled a team second to none. Her companions included the experienced oceanographer Dr. Rajesh Kapoor and their ace submersible pilot Finn O'Malley. Above them floated the support ship Horizon, keeping open a lifeline to these underwater pioneers. As Nautilus Prime dove into the dark blue, optical excitement stirred. It was about to dive deeper than any previously mapped expedition in this area, one of its goals being to document undiscovered species and data about deep-sea ecosystems. At 2,000 meters, the submersible lights revealed a world few had ever seen. Pulsing, weirdly bioluminescent creatures drifted past the viewports. Dr. Thornberry was still busily cataloging all their discoveries when a massive shadow appeared in the distance. They thought it was a rock formation at first, but the formation moved as they got closer. The tip of Finn's voice cracked a mix of awe and alarm in his declaration that a colossus squid, quickly twice the size of their vessel, was in their presence. Its eye a dinner plate in size, the creature looked back at them as though from a curiosity older than man's. There was a sense of mutual observation. Then, in another instant, the squid attacked. Massive tentacles wrapped around Nautilus Prime, their dinner plate-sized suckers lining them. The submersible groaned under the pressure as alarms blared, systems failing. Finn struggled with the controls, trying to break free, but it was relentless. Dr. Kapoor worked frenetically, trying to reinstate the power of the failing systems. Opposite her, Dr. Thornberry attempted to hail the surface, her usually calm voice now edged with urgency. The Horizon's replies came in fitful, static-laced bursts. As the hull moaned ominously, Finn said they would not be calamari that day. His gallows humor fell flat as they suddenly realized how precarious their situation really was. Even as the creature loomed menacingly over them, Dr. Thornberry couldn't help but be impressed. Her theory was that their lights must have either drawn or annoyed the squid. Most dangerously of all, she suggested they cut all external illumination. The submersible was plunged into utter darkness with the lights off. The team held their breath, feeling every movement of the giant squid through the hull. Slowly, agonizingly, they felt the pressure at ease. Just as hope began to rise, a tentacle crashed against the viewport, causing a spiderweb of cracks to burst forth. Water began seeping in, and the team's panic reached new heights. Dr. Kapoor rerouted emergency power through the submersible's external electrical field, which was designed to deter smaller predators. That jolt broke the last bits of resolve in the squid, and its grip became looser. Taking advantage, Finn gunned the engines and steered away from the beast. As they rose, they caught one last glimpse of the magnificent creature disappearing into the depths. It was not an easy trip to the surface, with failing systems left and right, and the integrity of the hull was compromised. When Nautilus Prime finally broke the surface, the crew of the Horizon cheered, unmindful of how close they had come to losing their colleagues. The whole incident became an item of exciting scientific interest to the team shortly after their encounter. It was partial. Data from Dr. Thornberry gave scientists the first ever look into the behavior of giant squid. Much to his annoyance, Finn found that he'd been nicknamed Calamari O'Malley by the crew. The incident kicked off debates about deep-sea exploration ethics and risks. For Dr. Thornberry, Dr. Kapoor, and Finn, it had been a humbling reminder of the untamed power of the ocean and the many mysteries that still lurked in its depths. They came out of that experience with increased respect for the creatures they studied and the need for caution in their future explorations. The giant squid returned to the abyssal world, leaving behind in the human world thoughts of what else might lie deep in the chasm-like depths. In the early summer of 2015, the limpid waters of the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Queensland, Australia, glinted in an Australian sun that knew no mercy. Designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the reef was home to an astoundingly arrayed collection of marine life. Of the myriad species calling this aquatic utopia their home, among the most overlooked of its treasures were the stingrays, masters of camouflage, deceiving and lurking in plain view in the sandy shallows. Zixon Quasar, 32, was a software engineer residing in Seattle. He always dreamt of visiting this natural wonder. Basically, along with his fiancée Lyra Nebulae, a veterinary nurse who is 29 years old, she had planned this for his birthday. Little did they know that their very adventure would turn into an unexpected, perilous one. On the third day in Australia, Zixon and Lyra decided to have a snorkeling tour with an enthusiastic marine biologist, Dr. Anemone Titlesong. As they boarded the boat, Dr. Titlesong briefed them on reef etiquette and the safety measures for that particular day. Her gestures were as animated as one would expect from someone of her disposition. Zixon, in his enthusiasm, half heard everything, his mind already under the waves. Finally, at the wanted snorkeling site, the first to dive into the warm, limpid water was Zixon. He gazed in awe at the silk of colors below, the vibrant coral formations, the darting schools of tropical fish, and the swaying of sea fans. Lyra followed with her underwater camera ready. Getting more excited, Zixon swam towards a really gorgeously colored patch of coral. His eagerness caused him not to notice the slight depression in the sand, with that bottomless pit right beside it. Feeling something soft yet unyielding beneath, he planted his foot to adjust his snorkel. In that instant, before his brain could process what happened, searing pain shot through his ankle. As a result of his surprise, the gashed stingray had lashed out with its barbed tail. Its penetrating venom cut straight through the wetsuit and into Zixon's muscle tissues. The pain was immediate and acute, beyond anything he had ever experienced. Zixon's leg began to tingle, and feeling completely out of control over the limb made him panicky. He moved in the water, struggling to call for help, but his snorkel filled with water as he gasped. Lyra noticed stress in her fiancé, so she swam toward him with powerful strokes. The attentive Dr. Titlesong had seen the whole scene from the launch and leaped in without hesitation, grasping Zixon just as he began to slip beneath the surface. Together with Lyra, they managed to keep his head above water and slowly returned to the boat. On board, Dr. Titlesong's training took over. Her survey of the situation took but a glance, the classic puncture wound of a stingray sting. Efficiently calm, she instructed the boat's captain to radio for emergency medical assistance while she began first aid measures. Dr. Titlesong stemmed the flow of blood, reaching for any bottles nearby to fill with scorching water, hoping to begin washing out the venom as the boat sped back to land. Slipping in and out of consciousness, Zixon vaguely recalled the image of Lyra above him, her tear-stained face, her hair now tangled and salty. When they docked, the paramedics were waiting. They whisked Zixon away to the nearest hospital, and Lyra went with Dr. Titlesong in a taxi. The next couple of hours went by in a blur of tests and treatments, punctuated by tense moments of waiting. Luckily, though painful and possibly dangerous, the sting hadn't caused any life-threatening complications. The prompt first aid administered by the good doctor had made a fair difference in Zixon's recovery. Zixon lay on the hospital bed, his leg impairing on a piled-up stack of pillows, all bandaged up, and realized the irony of it all. He had jetted off to Australia to view the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef, but ended up with a close-up personal encounter with one of its less glamorous creatures. It was a grim reminder of invisible dangers lurking in the most beautiful settings. This most certainly turned on Klieg lights for more stringent safety measures, and a deeper appreciation for knowledgeable guides like Dr. Titlesong. Over the successive weeks, as Zixon recovered, he and Lyra agreed that they had to spend some more time down under in Australia. It also allowed them to learn about marine conservation and the balance of reef ecosystems. He began working on a mobile app to help educate tourists about the safety of reefs and aquatic life. What had started off as a harrowing experience now felt more like a life-changing event. As they finally boarded their flight back to Seattle, Zixon and Lyra knew they would return to the Great Barrier Reef one day. Only next time, Zixon laughed, he'll make sure to perfect his stingray shuffle before ever bounding back into those alluring waters. The sun-kissed waters of Kona, Hawaii were abuzz with expectation as the 2004 Big Island Billfish Tournament began. Rich in its maritime heritage, dating as far back as the ancient Polynesian settlers, Kona had become a mecca for deep-sea fishing enthusiasts, its volcanic islands' steep underwater drop-offs creating the perfect hunting grounds for massive pelagic fish, drawing anglers from around the globe. At the helm, manning his vessel, was Captain Zachariah "Zach" Thornberry, a weathered, seasoned captain of 52 years. His gnarled hands gripped the wheel and he steered his salty senorita across the cerulean. Beside him, first mate Octavia "Octo" Reeves, a wiry man of 35 with a shock of bright red hair, styled his locks as he regarded the horizon for any sign of life. The client of the day, Bartholomew "Barty" Higginbotham III, was ensconced in the fighting chair, a paunchy Wall Street tycoon with more money than fishing sense. Barty had flown in on his private jet and was bound to catch the big one, to take back bragging rights to his country club for years to come. It read 3,000 feet as they went farther and farther offshore. Zach killed the engine. The boat leaked around in the current. Octo began setting up heavy tackle, spooling out vibrant lures made to lure giants of the deep. Hours crawled by under the pounding Hawaiian sun. Interest was beginning to wane. Barty had fallen asleep. His designer fishing hat was tilted precariously to one side of his head. In that second, the tranquility was shattered by the loud scream of the reel. Octo yelled, jerking Barty awake to the fact that they had got one. The mogul on Wall Street lurched to the chair, his palms sweating as he grasped the rod. The unseen Leviathan on the other end peeled off line at an alarming rate. Zach yelled over the reel's squeal that this was a monster, his eyes shining with excitement. That battle of wits, man against fish, would last for 2 hours. Barty went beet red in the face, back, and arms as he wrestled for each inch of line. Just when the fish tired a bit, an enormous blue marlin, well over 1,000 pounds, blew out of the water. A dumbfoundingly incredible tableau of power and grace. The big creature, its bill resembling a medieval lance, crashed onto the stern of the salty senorita. Octo was sprawled full length across the deck. Barty somersaulted out of the chair. The boat lurched precariously to one side, water pouring in over the splintered transom. Chaos flooded the stricken vessel. Zach struggled to hold on as the marlin thrashed about like a mad thing. Its heavy tail seemed ready to sweep anyone within reach clean over the side. Octo struggled to her feet, narrowly avoiding the fish's lethal bill as it slashed through the air. Barty, all thoughts of glory forgotten, was cowering behind the bait cooler, whimpering about wanting his mommy. The irony of this situation, the fearsome predator of Wall Street reduced to a quivering mess by an actual predator, was not lost on Zach. who let himself feel a wry smile despite the dire circumstances. With the water wellowing into the boat and the marlin showing no signs of relenting, Zach knew they had to think fast. He barked orders at Octo, who frantically began to bail water while simultaneously trying to subdue the thrashing fish. The seasoned captain circled the salty senorita in tight arcs, hoping to make the marlin dizzy and maybe shake it off the boat. After what had seemed an eternity of pounding heart action, the marlin finally slipped back under the waves to leave behind a path of destruction and 3 very shaken human beings. While Zach radioed for help, Octo patched the damaged transom to the best of her ability, given the limited supplies available. It was only within the hour that the Coast Guard arrived and escorted the bruised and battered salty senorita back into port. As they limped into the marina, a crowd had gathered. Word about their harrowing encounter had spread like wildfire through the fishing community. By the end, he was left with a bill for thousands of dollars in repairs and a boat that would sit out the rest of the tournament. Humbled, he spoke very little. Barty wrote a check to cover the damages and slunk away to catch the next flight back to New York. Still, Octo managed to find the silver lining in their misadventure and convinced Zach that this was an opportunity to upgrade Salty Senorita so that she could come out stronger and better for any other oceanic giants they would encounter. The marlin became etched into the lore of local fishing. Christened the Kona Kraken by enthusiastic storytellers, it grew into a tale of ever-improving detail, a testament to raw power and untamed spirit in the deep blue sea. The experience left a deep impression on all concerned. Zach gained a new respect toward the creatures he was hounding. Octo found reserves of courage she never knew she had, and Barty decided perhaps golf really was more his speed after all.